All right, welcome back. On this edition of the podcast, I'll be talking about the judicial branch of government, which is covered in Article 3 of the Constitution. Um, we've hit on this the last couple of days. Uh, the job of the judicial branch of government is obviously to interpret what the laws mean. Um, what that means is they get a law that's been passed by Congress and signed by the president. They look at that law and they decide whether or not that law is constitutional, whether it's allowed by the Constitution. The judicial branch of government includes the United States Supreme Court and all lower federal courts. Okay, in the judicial branch of government, the Supreme Court is the country's highest court. Whatever the Supreme Court says, that's what goes. There's no higher court than them. So they have the final word on a lot of issues. Their primary purpose is to protect the Constitution. What that means is they they make sure that not only Congress but also the president are following the guidelines in the Constitution, whether that's with their actions or whatever laws they create. They also resolve disputes that involve national laws, federal government, or states. Um, a few weeks ago in class, we talked about a lawsuit between the state of Kentucky and the state of Ohio over the border of the Ohio River and who actually had control of it. When two different states go to court against each other, when they take each other to court, that case goes automatically to the United States Supreme Court. This came out of the Articles of Confederation, where there was no national court system. And if one state had a problem with another state, it either went unresolved, the case was held in one of the states involved in the suit, or it could have started some kind of small skirmish or war. So the founding fathers thought that a national court system would really work here so that you'd have an impartial group of individuals looking at the cases. On the Supreme Court, you are appointed by the president. The president of the United States must appoint you to the Supreme Court or nominate you. These people then go through a very rigorous interview process in front of the United States Senate, and the United States Senate would vote on the candidate who's up for the Supreme Court. Usually, these interviews last 2 to 3 days, where the nominee will sit in front of a panel. And then the Senate would vote. And on the Supreme Court, if you are nominated and approved by the Senate, you would serve for life. There's really 3 ways to get off the Supreme Court. You either resign from office, so you quit and do something else. You might retire, which most of the people serving on the Supreme Court are older people. They're retirement age already. So it's very rare for a justice to actually retire on the Supreme Court. But the third way, obviously, is you might die as a member of the Supreme Court, that's actually a big issue over why President Obama, a lot of people didn't want him elected in 2008. We'll discuss that in just a few minutes. But once you're on the Supreme Court, you're on there for life. All decisions of the Supreme Court are final, and all lower courts must follow these decisions. If the United States Supreme Court comes down with a ruling, the state of Kentucky and the Kentucky Supreme Court must abide by that decision. The Supreme Court of the United States is the highest court in the country. Whatever they say goes. My phone's ringing here, but I'm just going to ignore that for right now. I'll call back. Cases in national or state courts may eventually be heard in the Supreme Court. So if you are put on trial and your trial is not fair, you might appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court. Probably the most important power of the Supreme Court is this right here, judicial review. What that means is they have the power to look at a law to determine if it is constitutional or not, whether it conflicts with the Constitution. This power was granted to the Supreme Court in a very, very famous Supreme Court case called Marbury v. Madison. And that court case was held in the late 1780s, early 1790s. And basically what it said was the Supreme Court had the power to review laws. Um, and we've had a Supreme Court that has done that since then. So Marbury v. Madison is a very, very important Supreme Court case. Here you'll see a few notable courts throughout history. You've got the Court of 1890 here, and you notice that all these guys are really old white males. You've got the Taft Court of 1930. This court is significant because this guy right here is a former president. That's William Howard Taft. He was the Chief Justice of this court. It's very rare that a president would leave office and then become a justice. I think this is the only time it's ever happened in our history. But he served as president first and then became a Supreme Court Chief Justice. Down here you have the Burger Court of 1970. This guy right here, very, very important Supreme Court Justice. That is Justice Thurgood Marshall. He's the first black Supreme Court Justice we've had in our nation's history. He was also the prosecuting attorney in the very famous court case Brown v. Board of Education of 1956, which ended segregation in public schools. And now you've got the current Roberts Court of 2015, but this is the court today, still the same makeup. And you'll notice you've got some different looking faces in this court 2010 than you would in 1890. You know, you've got Clarence Thomas here, obviously a black justice. He's been on the Supreme Court for about 30 years. He was nominated by Ronald Reagan. Here you've got Justice Anton Scalia. He's an Italian American, and he represents a lot of Roman Catholic and Italian American interests. Here you've got Ruth Bader Ginsburg, female justice, who's been on for about 25 years. She's probably the oldest member of the Supreme Court. I'd say she's about 85 years old now. Here's your Chief Justice, John Roberts. He was nominated by President George W. Bush. And you've got two other important justices here, Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Justice Elena Kagan, which were both nominated by President Obama. And, of course, they are female. So now in 2010, you've got a very diverse court, whereas in 1890, you had to be pretty much an old white male to be on the court. Now we have a court that represents a lot of interest in our country. And that'll end this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it.